I've been looking at urban habitats in prospective studies, local prospective studies, and I've done a series of them. There's an article coming in this month's BSBI News, or maybe out already, I don't know. But today I'm going to concentrate on one of them, on walls, which we're surrounded by walls, of course. These are local studies, limited local studies. I don't pretend that they're high-powered, but I think I hope they're of some interest to you. Of course, walls have been around for a long time, but we are making new habitats, and man has made a lot of new habitats, but this is one that's been around for quite a while. And they often are stone or brick or mortar, and tend to be base-rich in towns, which is an important feature. Of course, Romans built stone walls, and plants have been noted growing on them for some time. Certainly the Elizabethans did. And it's not just vascular plants, they're bryophytes, lichens, and so on. But I'm going to be talking mainly about, well, almost entirely about vascular plants now, because actually I don't know much about bryophytes and lichens, so I wouldn't presume. Of course, other things live there too. I mean, there are invertebrates and other things, but again, I'm just going to make passing mention. It's a difficult habitat for plants, but some have managed quite well. There have been various British surveys of walls. I just mentioned a few, the Durham survey, and Payne did some incredibly detailed, heroic-sized studies in southern England. And they're important for some ferns, and I'll come back to that, especially the spleenworts. And of course, some neophytes, aliens, recent aliens, have made their home there and thrive, or better or worse, like Ballinger. Not been all that much about Scottish walls, and I've tried to do some of that. I put mainly on East and North Scotland, Dundee in particular, and Easter Ross. I have ventured elsewhere. I've even been to Glasgow, you know, they let me in, but I have to be very careful when I do there, of course. I've been looking at the types of wall, the distribution of plants on the wall, how they last, and what we do about them, if anything. Some species I regard as wall specialists. These are old friends, which most of you will be very familiar with, and certainly in the areas I'll be looking at, they really make a big home on walls, particularly these two aspleniums, Rutamuraria wall rue, growing there in the cracks of a wall in Invergordon, I think, and maidenhair spleenwort, Asplenium trichomanes. These are really quite common in the areas we're looking at. These are natives, of course, but some overseas, well, immigrants now have really made their home on walls. I mean, Similarium auralis, I believe toadflax, is now very widespread. I think it's a beautiful plant, actually. I know there are mixed feelings about aliens, you know, but I think in some ways we're moving a bit away from botanical racism. Having said that, you know, some incomers are big problems, but some of them have added to our flora, I think, you know, opinion, okay. And Pseudophomeria lutea, yellow cordalis, again, it's a beautiful addition to our walls. And these often have quite a long flowering season. There are other ones too, I just mentioned a few. They're these bellflowers with utterly unpronounceable names. I can't, Poshkashkawana, Porinshagia, and peach-leaved and nettle-leaved. I go on to the ordinary names. Quite a good test if somebody's been drinking, I think, to get them to go through these names. So, but they flower, they're beautiful plants, and they flower for quite long periods, you know, but they're immigrants, but still they're beautiful. And there are other aspleniums too, Scolopendrium, which was, of course, Philitis heartstongue. That's quite widespread. And there's also black spleenwort, which again is fairly widespread on urban walls where I've been. Less common where I've been are these other two, Arylus alpinus, fairy foxglove. It's nearing its northern limit, and it does make it to Dundee. That's in the Perth Road in Dundee, but it hardly makes it to Easter Ross. And pelletry of the wall, that again, it's been increasing in Dundee. I think I haven't done a formal study of it, but it's certainly, I've seen a lot of it this year. In Easter Ross, there's just one unconfirmed record, so it really, it may be edging its way north. And there are other ones too that I regard as wall specialists to some extent, but I can't go through them all. Well, where do they come from? I mean, these walls are new. They must have been somewhere before. And rock faces, of course, with the aspleniums are probably one of their main sites. We don't think of rock faces in cities, but we do have some. I mean, Edinburgh's got some, but so has Dundee, Ballinger Hill in Dundee, where we've got aspleniums on the rock face and polypody and Dryopteris and so on. Polypody is a common epiphyte on trees and rocks in woodlands, but it does occur on urban walls. As I said, Cymbellaria is a Mediterranean species, Pseudophomeria from the Alps. So, some of them are incomers and some are old friends from other habitats. So, this was a lockdown project, actually. Here was I, confined to barracks in my house in West Dundee, but I looked at 50 mortared, mainly sandstone walls, at least 2 metres in height, in April to June 2020, noting all vascular plants in 100-metre sections. And the commonest, surprise, surprise, were the two aspleniums and Cymbellaria moralis, just the same as the three commonest species in the overall BSS Urban Flora data, which John Grace and Julia Wilson kindly gave me. 54 vascular plants altogether in this survey. I went in December to, I do believe in winter recording, it's something I do. You do find extra things. Okay, you don't find everything. And sometimes, if you're so busy, you don't get any time to go into places at other times of year anyway. And the cities can be quite interesting in winter. So one striking thing was the height above the ground. This particularly striking in Dundee, actually. There were more species in the second metre above the ground than the first. And the total plants, counting the total plants in these wall sections, in these 50 walls, there were only 19 Asplenium trichomanes and 228 in the first metre and 228 in the second metre. So there's many more in the second metre. Same effect for Rutamuraria, though perhaps rather less. And this held up in December. I went back and just the same in December. So second metre favoured. This is looking at it again in a slightly different way. This is a number of walls. And you see that the Asplenium rutamuraria, again, rather more walls, and Asplenium trichomanes, rather more walls on the second metre, and just about not on the tops at all. They don't make it to the top. But some of the other common ones, Cymbellaria, some of it makes to the top, not as many as on the wall, but Taraxacum and Budlia, either as much or virtually as much on the top of the wall as on the base. The bottom of the wall, the top of the wall is a different habitat. I mean, it's flat, it has more debris on it, so it's a different world up there. Some people say it may be protecting the wall anyway, so, good thing for the wall sometimes, I don't know. Looking at the aspect of the walls, which direction are they pointing, the predominant aspect. Now, figures here are too small to really be very conclusive, but there is some suggestion in these figures that the plants don't really like south-facing walls very much. These are the wall specialists, the Asplenium trichomanes, only a third, and on the south-facing, and more than 2/3 on the north-facing. Figures are too small to be really definite about this, and I haven't taken that further. So, the base of the wall, it's another different world, like the top of the wall, even more different than the top of the wall. And within 1 centimetre of the bottom of the wall, the commonest species were really quite different. Annual meadowgrass, willow herbs, thale cress, groundsel, dandelion, hairy bittercress. It's just like an ordinary pavement wildflower stroke weed flora, isn't it? These are sort of species, they're getting sprayed often. I mean, Herbicide Man lives on in Dundee. This is a Dundee survey. And they've got to be things that grow quickly, seed quickly, and then die and wait for the next generation. So it's a different story at the base of the wall. Although the herbicide may be getting onto the base of the wall, and that may be one of the reasons for the fewer plants on the base of the wall. Herbicide and salt may be the other thing there, because the Dundee Council has started gritting and salting its pavements. As an elderly citizen, I'm very pleased they are, because Dundee's a hilly place and it avoids me breaking my neck. I had a fall on the ice. First time I've ever done it last winter, actually. Oof. You know, pleased they're doing the pavements, but the plants may not be very amused. Dundee may not be entirely typical. It's on the east coast, and we get these sea mists, particularly down near the Tay, which is where I'm talking about these walls mainly. So it may not be typical, and the sandstone may be different. On the other hand, it's the mortar that's so important rather than the actual stone. I did quite a different study in Easter Ross. Again, it's a 10-year, I did it in 2011 and 2020 again, just walking around the town centre in the 12 small towns we've got. And the commonest species were rather different: dandelion, cimbellaria, red fescue, and male fern. No loss of biodiversity, in fact, a slight increase, though you know, the numbers are not big enough to be very definite about that. I looked at the location on the wall in Easter Ross. This is Invergordon. It's a bit similar to Dundee in some ways. It's sloping down to the Cromarty Firth. And here, the first and, this is only 11 wall sections, the first and second metres had the same number of species, actually. But there were more plants of both Rutabaria and Trichomania. So though the numbers are not staggering there, not as much as Dundee. And again, they don't make it at the top of the wall at all. Looking at Perth, which is 20 miles inland from Dundee, although just at the upper tide limit of the Tay, again, there were slightly more species on the second metre, not significant really, but and more plants of the two aspleniums, but not as striking as in Dundee. And I've seen a similar picture elsewhere. The other species there were Buddleia, wall lettuce, broadleaf willow herb, and yellow corydalus. Well, what affects the habitats on the wall? It's a tough place for plants, these walls, and you know, they're noble, pioneering creatures that get up there. Well, the wall structure to some extent, and certainly rough cast is deadly for plants. They do not like it at all. Water availability can be limited and variable. Light, there's a lot of light usually, isn't there? But other species, that's an advantage in some ways, because it's these wall specialists that can cope, whereas a lot of these other species may make it briefly onto these walls, but they don't last. And salt on the road or pavement may be very relevant to the base of the wall. Herbicide at the base, very relevant probably. And of course, the cleaning boys are out and about sometimes. I know friends who've got a gardener in, and the first thing the gardener does is clean their walls, you know, which is a shame, really. And air pollution, which may have diminished a bit, but that's a factor, obviously. Here are some of the factors in action. I mean, the plants at the base of the wall there, the ivy leaf toadflax is just being demolished in Perth there on the wall by the herbicide. And that's the effect of the wet wall there. In Tain, a wet wall is growing the male fern profusely, nothing on the other bit of the wall. Rural walls are quite a different story. In fact, so much I couldn't really make a definite correlation between the two. They're mainly dry stone. They're often much more heavily vegetated. They can disappear under all the vegetation there, you know, and you don't know the wall's there. I looked at 20 sections of rural walls in Easter Ross, and there were 88 species, actually slightly more than in my urban sample, but you know, they're so different I wouldn't want to be too definite about that. Many more neophytes on the urban walls than the rural walls. This is a feature again and again when we look at different habitats between urban and rural. 9% neophytes, aliens, on the rural walls, 22% were on the urban walls. And the commonest species on these rural walls I looked at were quite different. Rose bay, polypody, red fescue, common mouse ear, male fern, and smooth meadowgrass. Polypody, when it was there, was dense and very persistent. I followed some of these walls over several years, and just like the polypody as an epiphyte on trees, which I discussed at the urban meeting last autumn, you know, very persistent, but of individual plants too. Some of the rural walls are dominated by bryophytes, and again, they can be quite profuse. That's by Nig, that picture there. So very different story generally. This is looking at persistence of walls, or plants on walls. How long do they last? You know, is it a recipe for a long life? Probably not. This is a 20-year study. I looked at 23 streets around my home in West Dundee in 2001 and revisited in 2020. Looking at, I've pulled out the wall specialists here, and this is the number of streets. And the number of streets of Asplenium rudimentaria, just the same, but a lot of the streets are different. And Asplenium trichomanes, some increase, I don't know why really, but again, many of them are different. Cimbalaria muralis, more, this may be a true increase, I think, and often not the same. Same story with Pseudofumaria lutea. So I think that there's flux. Although I don't think I've got more astute. I think I've got less astute, if anything. And and of course things may be lurking in the wall, but it does suggest change. And I looked at individual plants. This is over 1 year in Dundee, 10 meters, 12 10-meter sections of walls in these Asplenium-rich streets going down to the river, and counting the number of actual plants and where they were with photographs and sketches. So Asplenium trichomanes, exactly the same number a year later, at the same time of year, late autumn, but in the same place, only 55%. And if even then you can't guarantee the same plant, it may not be. Of course, they may be lurking, you know, there are all sorts of things, but rudimentaria, there's a lot less of it, and that seemed to be more in the same place. Cimbalaria muralis, only 70%, 71% in the same place. So it does suggest considerable turnover, short-lived, rapidly propagating, but, you know, it may not be the same plant, it may be lurking, so all the usual cautions, but it does suggest a lot of turnover there. Another study I did over 10 years, this is Easter Ross. I followed 10 3-meter sections on 10 different walls in 8 towns. And the commonest here were the 2 Asplenium, Cimbalaria muralis, and Dropteris felix mass, male fern, all on 6 walls, 26 species. And over the 10 years, only 6 of the 26 species were visible on the same wall every year. So, you know, there was not persistence there. Slightly more persistent were the Aspleniums, which were on 3 out of their 6 walls every year, and rudimentaria and Cimbalaria on 2 of their 6 walls. But again, not always in the same place. So many individual plants seem to have a pretty short life. I mean, it's a tough place up there. There are many things going against them, but they have adapted to it overall as species quite well. great contrast to rural epiphytes, the polypody on trees that I talked about at the other meeting, where the polypody on oak trees seem to hold up very well for 10 years. Same tree, probably the same plant. You know. Of course, other creatures come to walls. There's some that actually live on walls. I haven't got any pictures of spiders, I'm afraid, but these are mainly visitors. But you know, a lot of creatures come. Sometimes they feed on the walls, of course. Grasshopper there, snail, I think, maybe feeding on algae, I don't know, and a moth, a beauty, which a mottled beauty, I think it is, in my moth trap. Incredibly well camouflaged on that wall, isn't it? This mottled beauty, and it was a common one on my Dundee moth trap. And of course, birds. You know, house martins. That's my flat in Easter Ross with all the birds nesting. So you know, a lot of other creatures have a use for walls. Not all walls are the same. Not all urban walls are the same. I mean, you may think it's a tough life being on a street, but the sea walls do have extra hazards, more salt exposure and wave action, and some vertical walls so exposed to the sea. I didn't see any vascular plants at all. There we are on the, there, this is, whoops, this is Thurso on the left there, and there are just some algae on that wall. It's very exposed, of course, north coast. And Port Mahomac, there are no plants on the actual wall, though there's some on the top there. Round the corner, I did see one Lamus arenarius plant actually on the wall, but it's rather unusual on these exposed vertical sites in my experience, where I've been to see that. Once you get into a harbour, slightly different story. I mean, that's Thurso Harbour, which has got just round the corner from that other picture I showed. And that's got some plants on it. I think it's Rumex crispus. You can't quite see it very well on the wall there. And of course, the other one, the Tayport in North Fife, quite a lot there in the harbour. Mainly with, I think there's Soncus and Rumex crispus there. Mainly in the upper part of the wall, because of course the lower bit gets hammered by the salt water, and it's seaweed coming in at the bottom here, of course. But it's a more sheltered space, and they do better. Sloping sea walls do better too. These walls are at 45 degrees. And again, they seem to do better for plants, the ones I've looked at anyway. North Keswick, that's lot of plants towards the top where it's easier to hang on, I suppose. And of course, it is slightly sheltered because it's opposite Inverness. And Cromarty, again, it's in the Cromarty Firth, opposite Nig, and the same sloping wall with Triperospermum, I think probably Meritemum on the wall there, and other things. Another pool at the top there, that's some more on the wall there than on the vertical sea walls, which is directly on the sea.
Right,
thanks. Graveyards. I looked at 14 short sections of 8 cemeteries in Easter Ross, and there were more records in the lower section than the upper there. Vegetation was often sparse. And it does suggest that where these cemetery walls are different, that they don't have the herbicide generally, because they're well back from the path and their graves by them, and they don't have the salt effect. It does suggest that on the street walls, it may be herbicide and salt that are causing the plants to die at the bottom. I don't know. These are just a few graveyard walls. That's Sphagnum trichomanes in Ullapool, Cymbalarium borealis and Antarinum in the Western Cemetery in Dundee, and the Yellow Coriodalis in the Grange Cemetery in Edinburgh. So, they're often quite interesting, the graveyard walls. Brick walls. You know, we hardly have any brick around here that's not covered. I think we're a bit too posh to have open brick. You know, we have to cover it with rough cast. But where we do have brick walls, quite similar to the stone walls, but that's an industrial wall in Dundee with a sphenium, and that's a wall in Glasgow. I ventured into Glasgow with near Queen Street Station, and the two spheniums are on the wall there, brick wall. Other vertical habitats, of course, we do get some vascular epiphytes in towns. I suppose they're not truly quite vertical, are they? They're tucked in between the trees, but these are all in Dundee, these pictures. But the sorbus on the top there, Soncus oleraceus on the bottom here, and and on the edge of town, it's a buckler fern in a small woodland on the edge of town. So what do we do with our urban walls? Well, they're okay for small herbaceous plants, like the bryophytes, lichens and ferns, so best to leave them if you can, best to leave them. Some woody plants can be a problem. Trees, woody herbs, some woody perennials may need to be removed because they can damage the wall. So we've created a new habitat here and other new habitats too. So all is not lost. You know, we are getting new things. Difficult for plants. Some do better than others. Some have adapted well. Often better in the upper part of the wall. Bryophytes and lichens do well. Some only pass through. But they are of conservation importance. And I suggest that we do try and keep them. They're beautiful. Let us enjoy our walls and let them flourish as far as we can. Thank you.